Welcome to WLNM, the web novel and manga review, hosted by Zeke Changuris.
Welcome to WLNM, the web light novel and manga review podcast, the podcast dedicated to bringing our listeners the independent creators and writers and artists that are part of this renaissance of creativity, giving us stories to entertain and inspire us. Today, we'd like to welcome Kevin, aka Ink Bamboo, the author of Rebirth of the Undead King.
Hey, Z, thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for joining me. Let's see, the description of your story is a young village boy finds the remains of a fallen god. He receives the opportunity to enact revenge against the monarchy of his kingdom. Tyrants, nobles, and criminals come after him. He's forced to confront society's dark side and his own, and he struggles with inner demons, and he must make very difficult choices. So that's how it's written up on Amazon. How would you kind of describe your story?
Oh, that's a fair question, because a lot of people hype their stories up in the description because there's got to be some keywords over there. Yeah. What I would normally say about it to people is it is pretty much two stories, or one story from two perspectives, whether we have two characters. One of them is Amro, who is the death god that is spoken of in that description. And the story from his perspective is a story about duty above all, about noblesse oblige, like the obligations he has as a deity to just conform to all these expectations the world has against him. And then there's the story from the perspective of Ceres, who is the boy described in the book's description, which is a story much more from a side of the loss of innocence, so to speak.
Okay, so it seems to be kind of a dark fantasy setting. I'm imagining we're talking about knights and lords. Are we set it in more of a medieval setting?
Yes, that's the case. Okay.
I see there's little hints of Overlord in here. So what's your homage to Overlord?
Okay, first of all, this is a comparison I originally didn't do myself. It was only until several readers started doing it for me that I opted to adopt it. It's mostly in the sense that if you've ever read the novels for Overlord, they're written not from the perspective of the protagonist, but rather the stories of the peoples whose life are affected by the protagonist. So okay. in that sense, Rebirth of the Undead King is not only written from the perspective of Amro and Ceres, the two protagonists, but rather it is written from the perspectives of all the commoners, the nobles, the lords, the criminals who get involved into their story and therefore get affected by them.
Okay, so and this world that he's trying to, I guess, make more just, or trying to seek revenge against, it sounds a little bit like that dark kind of world that's in Akame ga Kill. If you've ever seen that,
yeah,
where like society is corrupt, and it's a matter of going and trying to find a way to right that society. So power isn't absolute.
To be fair though, this might be a pessimistic opinion from myself.
Go ahead.
But I do think society is corrupt overall.
Okay.
Rebirth of the Undead King just goes about it rather than just as a complaint against society. It is more of a loss of innocence, where someone who is in the know about that corruption presents all the details and inner workings about it to someone who has no idea about them.
Okay. All right. So now, where did this idea come from? Is it something you saw? Was it something that was kicking around in your head? What brought about this idea?
Oh, probably a previous work of mine I was working on. Because originally, when I started writing, I did so as a web novel, not a fully published book. And I was writing a story named The Area of Tao, which was a story about a priest facing all the corruption from humanity. And so the very idea of just someone with innocence, without knowledge of this corruption, of this dark side of society, going against it, learning about it, and trying to fight it from within, was what kind of inspired to do this other story, which apparently was much more successful than the previous one.
Well, hey, it's interesting where our ideas eventually come from. The number of stories I've started and scrapped over time are countless, and eventually a good idea comes out of something. So, are you the kind of writer that was always a storyteller, or did you kind of come into the idea that you have something to put down on paper later?
I probably grew into the idea. I don't think I ever was someone who went too much into writing. Reading, yes, because I've always loved books ever since I was a child. But writing was something quite new for me. I only started doing so around 2018 or so. Um, I mean, before that, I wrote for a magazine and other similar mediums, but writing as in stories was something quite new for me. I mean, it still is. I only have 2 books outside. Probably the third coming
That
later
is
this
two
month.
more books than a lot of people that want to be writers. So that in itself is an accomplishment. And the fact that you started in
Thank you.
2018 and you've managed to put 2 complete stories on paper, so to speak, is impressive. The Think of all the people who start the "I'm going to write a novel in a month" campaign and like fizzle out after 4 days.
But you know what they say, right? You have all your life to write your first book. You only have 6 months to write the second. I mean, that's what I get from my readers most of the time. So,
Or you could be like J.R.R. Martin and just take, a
oh
decade
yeah,
to finish the
punish them.
next one. Yeah, punish your readers as often as possible. So, what kinds of stories were the first stories you tried tackling?
uh, I mean, for lack of a better way to say it, it's probably always been inside the genre of fantasy,
Okay.
perhaps dark fantasy to be a bit more specific. I mean, it's only these 2 stories I've written: the Rebirth of the Undead King series and the one before it, the Area of Tau. But aside from those, um, I'm not familiar with much other ways of writing.
Well, what attracts you to this particular genre?
Uh, if I had to say it somehow, it would probably be the realism about it. Because, more often than not, when you read fantasy, it's kind of a power fantasy. It's everything being perhaps challenging, but also ideal for the protagonist. Whether in dark fantasy, I think there's a bit more of realism in the sense that they not only have to face adversity, but that it is also a possibility that they die, they lose, that they end up in the bad side of things.
Okay, all right. That's a very, I guess, a very apt way of describing darker fantasy. I mean, it seems weird to use the term realism, but I understand where you're going there. That
Yeah.
there's not always the case where the hero always wins, or the hero has just enough power to overcome his obstacles. Which
Or the
did you
power
get?
of friendship comes
Oh,
into, yeah.
hey, just let's not diss My Little Pony, because the power of friendship was very influential in my early childhood. So
Okay.
that verse, that though, if you ever watch the 1980s midnight My Little Pony, uh, like Terror at Midnight Castle or something, I think that was the title of it. That episode, that like little movie kind of thing, that was dark, dude. It was a little
Okay.
dark.
I've
For
I've never had the chance to see it.
you might be able to find it online. It's a little dark, and it's for 1980s talk. It was a little scary. It was not even close to what we think about with My Little Pony today. So yeah, but again, that's how old I am. So what about what is you think your strongest suit is in writing? Are you a a creator of worlds? Are you a creator of characters? Is your strong suit, you think, your dialogue, or is it in like description of things like your action?
Oh, I would. I mean, uh, going about not what I think, because I probably am too insecure to think I'm good at any of those. I'm going to go ahead and say pacing, just because that's something several reviewers, for some reason, have liked about my books.
Pacing.
Yeah,
That's not something to be underrated on, because pacing is important. The number of books, even by what I'd say like known writers, I think the last couple volumes of Shield Hero, the pacing has just been too slow for me. I am dragging myself through these volumes of the Shield Hero because he just gets bogged down in too many details.
side quests. Yeah,
Well, I don't need to know all about the leveling. I don't need to know, what stat connects with what stat to create what thing. Just let's progress the story a little faster. So
yeah.
pacing can't
Uh,
you cannot discount pacing as something that's really really helpful.
Yeah,
Um,
I want to think readers are often underrated by writers because you know some people feel the need to over explain too much just about every detail on their world. I think readers usually have the capacity to deduct most of those details if they're giving enough clues beforehand. So, I mean that's the way I see it, at least.
okay, well, I think that could be a very valid assessment. Um, do you One of my favorite questions, do you ever find yourself writing yourself into a corner? Like
Oh,
that's one of my favorite questions, because everyone has a very interesting story about writing into a corner.
yes. I mean, the very straightforward answer is a yes. I really don't think any writer out there can probably say a no against that question. Perhaps the very talented few who write 20K words a day or something. But yes, I often fall into places where I realize I might have written myself into a situation that just doesn't flow naturally, or where characters are just not being themselves, where I'm forcing them to act as someone else. Um, Perhaps it's because I'm early into the whole writing business, but there's a lot of insecurity, which leads me to question a lot of what I write. And because of that, I keep going in circles a lot of the time. Where, I mean, if you could see my Google Drive folder, for example, you would see for this third book that I'm about to publish in this month, um, I have about 80 something deleted chapters, whereas the book is about 28 chapters long.
Yeah, that's a lot of editing there. And
Yeah.
moving into the editing, do you have a good trusted editor, like a good person that you throw your pages at and say, well, you read this, and then they can give it a good critical look? Or are you leaving yourself to like parse through all this one man band style?
Yes. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I wouldn't be where I am if not for my editors. And I'm going to use plural for this because
Okay.
there's several people I work with. Um, Most of them I met during the old days of web novels before this big company called Chidian entered into the scene.
Okay.
We were all into just writing groups online, and a lot of them, I mean, became close friends in a digital way, so to speak.
Yes.
And so across along my whole writing journey, I've been next to them, and they've been giving me feedback. They've been reviewing my work. Some of them I've worked with more formally, as in paying them in order
Hmm.
to review my book in full detail. And yes, I rely on editors a lot. I couldn't do half of the quality I give into my books if not for them.
Yeah, I agree. Editor, about a good editor, someone who can give you an honest but fair opinion of things and not just nitpick, is a very valuable resource. And I think to any writer, uh,
Yes.
that is that's more priceless than gold sometimes, because you've got to have that good relationship with someone who's going to look at it, and they're not going to be like, well, this sucks, redo it. They're going to be like, well, this doesn't make sense here. Maybe
I mean, it's
maybe
not
you
that
meant
far off.
and maybe you meant to say this. I mean, my wife is my main editor. She will
Oh,
always
okay.
be she will always be my main editor, but she also has learned to understand my language.
Hmm.
She's like, you're trying to say this, but that's not what you're saying at all. And so she's been very good at
Yeah,
editing my works, because she's grown to understand how I think, and to have someone you work with that can really help that way is really, really, really priceless.
I mean, there's got to be honesty with someone you're working with as an editor,
Yeah,
because if they really can't tell you about your own mistakes, then they're not able to do their job.
exactly. Yep. And sometimes as long as they understand the creative ideas, that this is your story, and they're just there to give feedback and be and but if you want to go a certain way, it's your choice to go a certain way with it. And as long as they get that an editor really, really helps. When I do edit work, I do my best to let the writer speak for themselves, and I will do my best to help them with their mechanics. I will do my best to help them rephrase things, because I have a couple people who work for me where English
Hmm.
is their second language. And so they don't always put these sentences together the way they need to be put together.
Yeah.
That
I'm
happens
guilty of that myself.
that happens sometimes. And so I'm like, I think you really meant to say this. But I really, it really, there's a lot of trust there between editors and writers, and having been on both ends, that really is something. What's your favorite kind of scene to write? Where, I mean, you've got a fantasy story, so is it the chase? Is it the adventure? What's the favorite type of scene?
Uh, if I had to go for one, it would probably be monologues.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever gotten that answer, but I think just writing a monologue allows you to challenge yourself in your own understanding of your characters. It just gives you this opportunity to present like an ideological debate against yourself, where you show what you know about your characters and whether you're able to prove you understand their motivations, what drives them.
That may be the best argument I've ever heard for monologues ever. Yeah, that is a great way of approaching that. I mean, I always just say, well, Shakespeare wrote an awful lot of monologues. They called them soliloquies because they were done on stage, but that's what it is. I think that's probably the best answer to why to write any scene monologue. Um, how about authors? Do you have you ever are you ever trying to mimic a certain style, or is there an author that has influenced the way you shape what you're writing or approach your plots?
Yes, most definitely. I don't know if I can recall the name of all of them. I can recall the titles they wrote.
Oh, go ahead.
The first one would be probably Terry Goodkind, the author of Wizard's First Rule, the Sword of Truth series. I just believe, or it is my impression, he's like one of these authors who opened the way for fantasy writers, just as a more mainstream kind of story. So his stories overall was something that gave me passion for reading. So there's that. There's also the Faraway Paladin series, which is a Japanese, translated into English, originally Japanese work. Uh, I mean, it's written in as a light novel, but it is quite more complex than your average light novel. I would say that was probably the book that encouraged me to write. Um, I mean, it had a perspective about deities that I hadn't met before in another book. And that's why I originally started with the story from a priest's perspective. And then there's also probably Dungeon Defense, which is a Korean light novel translated into English that it gave me inspiration into the more darker side of fantasy, because it went a whole lot into the political issues facing the protagonists and their world, the corruption of their system, and the need, or so to speak, the need for evil they actually had in their world.
Okay, well, all right. You seem to have mentioned a couple things a couple times. You've talked about politics, and you've talked about basically good versus evil. Is there a certain theme that you like to latch on to, or you think that this genre is a great place to stories are great allegories for things?
Mm-hmm.
And so are you trying to create an allegory, or is that just something that fits that those subject matters seem to just flow into?
I mean, I feel politics is inescapable for anybody. They're just so intrinsical to everything we do on our daily lives that you can't actually separate from them. Even more so on a writing media where you're creating a world of sorts. Uh, I know I've been accused sometimes of being perhaps too political in my story. I remember one Amazon review called me a communist for writing a scene where the people stood up to the nobles. Yeah.
Well, okay, tell that to the Victor Hugo. I think Les Miserables was very much about that.
So, but I don't think I do so intentionally. It's more of a thing that just flows in naturally, and perhaps the topic I like to bring into all of this is apathy, which I think flows really well in grimdark and dark fantasy stories, because truth is a lot of people feel apathetic to all these political issues, or all these, I mean, issues in general. People just like to live their lives and they like to enjoy them as is, and they don't want to be overcomplicated by all these topics. And so apathy as a whole concern, as a topic itself, it flows pretty naturally in these genres, and that's something I like about them.
uh, the idea that you just there's a segment of society that just likes to turn a blind eye, so to speak, to uh, anything unpleasant.
I mean, you can't actually blame them, because living against the flow is, it's it's negative. It has negative implications for you.
Yeah. So what it's what what would you say is the I guess your greatest writer's high comes from? What accomplishment when you're writing are you like, yeah, that was the best part? Is it the finished product, or does it happen more on a scene by scene basis,
Ooh,
where you're like, oh yeah, that was perfect, I can keep going? You
I mean, there's definitely that as a small victory. Uh, can't forget about them. Wouldn't be able to finish the book without those. But probably having the finished product, just being able to finish that Kindle file and be able to upload it to Amazon's server. That's something that brings so much satisfaction. Where you say, I can finally take a few weeks off of writing and perhaps give a finished product to my readers, who will be done with it by the next week and asks for more. But I mean, that's the way it is.
Hey, we used to call it in the news business feeding the beast. You just have to
Yeah.
keep putting stuff in, because they just want more, and you're fortunate if they do want more, and no one's
Yeah,
saying it.
most definitely.
Yeah. So um let's see, just a couple more questions here for you. So what do you think on a trying to think of a better way to put it, do you think that the the genres that are currently out there, when it comes to um, everything seems to have a little darker tint to it nowadays. Even the magical girl genre in anime all seem to want to go a little bit dark. Do you think that's like a reaction to things, or is it just that's what people are watching at the moment, and that
Um,
it's
not
like a secular
not really
secular.
though.
No.
Uh, I would think that's actually an issue about the maturity of the medium,
Okay.
because you know TV is relatively new, all things considered. It's just a couple decades.
Yeah.
The probably just widespread books easily accessible to the public are as well, because there was a point in time where books were not that as easily accessible to
Yes.
everybody. um, and with that, with more people coming in and reading the books, there's a chance to have a more mature discussion about topics which might interest the readers. And so I believe this darker approach more writers, more authors, more creators are taking is just an expression of that freedom we're gaining as a society, to express darker approaches to topics or just conversations we weren't able to have before, and people being able to take part in them from a more mature standpoint.
Hey, some of your answers are well. I can tell you've got some of that psych education in your background, because some of your answers are really well thought out here. Because and I guess we can tie that into
Thank
the
you, I
last.
guess.
Yeah, the last question. Do you think? I mean, I guess all writers in a way are armchair psychologists, because they've got to understand the emotional
A mind,
well-being
yeah.
and the motivations behind all their characters. Do you think some of your training kind of helps you out, gives you an edge there?
Probably. I wouldn't. I mean, it's almost impossible for me to answer that question since I already received the training. Uh, I will definitely say sometimes when I'm writing, I do remember some stuff said by my teachers at some points in time, and I will try to implement that. Uh, but I think more than my training as a psychologist, it's more of me as a person, as a whole. It's just I think every time a writer writes something, there's a part of them that goes into the story. And I mean, being a psychologist is inescapably a part of me in that sense.
That's a great, that's a very astute and amazing way to put it. Thank you very much. And is there anything else you'd like listeners to know? You got the, is this going to be a third and final part that's coming out,
Oh,
or is it just continuing?
no, it's a continuation. I have my third book just tentatively scheduled for the 28th or just around those days. There might be some editor delays before the publishing date is actually fixed, but I know within the next month it should be out.
All right, that sounds great, and we can't wait to see that pop up on the Amazon list.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And if I know you're a lot like me, and you think that it's amazing right now because the barriers to entry into the market um, are much lower than they used to be, because
Thank God
independent
that's the
authors
case.
really
Yeah.
can be independent authors and truly make a go of it and get their stories out there. We can follow you at Ink Bamboo and find copies of your books on
On Amazon,
Amazon.
yes.
Yes, and so if you would like what you heard today and would like to us to continue to share these conversations with our artists, authors, creators, and industry pros, please click the subscribe button. And until next time, keep reading.
This has been a WLNM podcast.